Turns out he stole one of the vials of the serum, so Steve starts chasing after him, realizing that he was a lot faster, a lot stronger, and a lot more agile. And as Kruger is trying to escape, Steve goes all Aquaman and just dives in and just throws him out of the submarine. And before Steve can ask any questions, Kruger decides to take a cyanide pill. Pretty cliche way to die there, Kruger. So now with Dr. Eskrin being dead and the serum being gone with him, the SSR had no choice but to engage and to fight against Hydra. Even though Steve wanted to help and be a part of the war, Colonel Phillips still felt like he didn't need to be a part of it, so he just left him to be studied by scientists. Which I'm not fully sure why he would. I mean, Jesus, look at the size of that man. Well, then Senator Brandt approaches Steve to give him the opportunity to tour the nation to promote the war efforts with the USO. They wanted to use Steve in the way he looked now to encourage people to promote the war. But now he starts going by his comic book superhero named Captain America and wearing a pretty almost accurate version of his comic book costume. However, as much as Steve gets to punch Hitler in the face, he still felt like he needed to be more involved in what was going on. So then we're brought back to Europe to see Schmidt is talking to 3 Nazi soldiers who are there to supervise everything that's going on. He ends up having to kill them after they realize that he's also planning on attacking Germany along with other countries. After doing this, Schmidt declares his secession of the Third Reich, stating that Hydra will no longer live in Hitler's shadow. We later go back to Steve at Italy, performing for the SSR and having a not-so-star-spangled time. While he's there, he finds out that Bucky was actually captured after trying to invade a Hydra base. He later confronts Colonel Phillips to try to see if there's anything they can do to rescue the troops. Colonel Phillips insisting that there's nothing they can do and that Steve should just continue touring on. So then Steve, being as persistent as he is, decides to do it himself. Anyway, Steve's not alone as he starts getting the help from Peggy and Howard Stark. They're able to fly Steve over where he's able to sneak into Hydra's base, rescue all the soldiers that were inside, have them start a riot while he goes look for Bucky. He later finds Bucky confused on an operation table and carries him out of there. Schmidt, realizing that everyone's escaping and seeing Steve basically plowing through soldiers, decides to set the whole warehouse to self-destruct because what villain doesn't self-destruct everything that he's building? So as Steve and Bucky are trying to escape, they end up confronting Schmidt, who's on a high catwalk, looming over the entire exploding building. After punching each other in the face a couple of times, Zola ends up pulling a lever which starts separating the catwalk from each other. And Schmidt later pulls off his face, that's right, his face, and reveals that he has another face from the effects of the super soldier serum.
You don't have one of those, do you?
Weirdly enough, he claims that whatever happened to him after the serum was Eskrin's greatest success. Which, in case you guys didn't know, that gives him his supervillain name, the Red Skull. So then he starts giving this whole speech about how him and Steve are the evolution of man and that they need to be proud of their power and blah, 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 villain speech. So Red Skull and Zola decide to escape the building in this weird helicopter-looking thing, which I really need someone to explain to me how that works. And as Steve and Bucky start running away, they have a dramatic cliffhanging moment letting you know whether or not they've escaped or not. We then see that Colonel Phillips declares that Steve died in action until suddenly Captain America's theme just starts playing and then a group of soldiers just start walking down through the giant trail thing, and it's a touching, cool moment to show that Steve could do it the whole time.
Hey! Let's hear it for Captain America!
After rescuing them, Steve earns the respect of his higher officers and earns a higher ranking as Captain America. While he's waiting for a meeting with Howard Stark to talk about his uniform, he ends up getting a very interesting thank you from someone who's not Peggy. Speaking of Peggy, she ends up walking in and seeing the two sucking face. Turns out she's not a huge fan of that.
Captain, we're ready for you, if you're not otherwise occupied.
While Steve and Howard are talking about new equipment, he sees a circular object underneath that was made by vibranium and apparently the strongest metal on Earth. Peggy walks into the room and decides to test it out. So then we ended up getting this giant montage of superheroism. We see him blowing up bases, taking down enemies, and throwing a shield, and just doing a bunch of superhero stuff, just things blowing up everywhere. Is my daughter crying? We then see Peggy and Phillips seeing clips of them at war and notice that Steve has a picture of Peggy, which is kind of sweet. We then see the team preparing an assault to attack a train that apparently has Zola inside of it. While the team is trying to retrieve Zola, they end up being attacked by a heavily armored Hydra soldier. The soldier starts shooting Steve and Bucky, ends up blowing a giant hole in the train. And Bucky, trying to defend himself, picks up Cap's shield and ends up shooting himself out of the train and falling to his death. After fighting Zola, Steve is pretty bummed out, but Peggy goes to convince him that his sadness needs to be what he uses to end Hydra for good. After getting some information from Zola, Steve finds out about Hydra's final stronghold to finally end their reign for good. Steve is then captured by the Red Skull, which leads to an all-out fight between the both of them. But before Cap gets on the plane, he lays a big one on Peggy.
Keep it steady!
Wait! Go get him.
I'm not kissing you.
So, after Red Skull and Steve go blow for blow, Steve ends up destroying the machine that was holding the Tesseract. And Red Skull, trying to rescue it, I guess, grabs it and then just disappears into space, I would assume. Then we see Steve having to radio in the SSR, letting them know that he has no other choice but to crash the plane. So then, in one last touching moment with Peggy, they start talking about how they're going to dance together, which was a conversation that they had when they were in the car, when he talked about how he couldn't find the right dancing partner.
Gonna need a rain check on that dance.
All right. A week next Saturday at the Stork Club.
You got it.
And right before he could finish what he was going to say, the call cuts off and Steve is gone, and it's a pretty sad moment. We then start seeing that the war ends up being won. The Howling Commandos, the people who he fought with, start making a toast for him. And Peggy receives a folder that has a picture of Steve, but it's not the picture of buff Steve, but it's the picture of small skinny Steve, because that's the Steve who she ultimately fell in love with. And then it shows Howard on a ship looking for Steve. He finds the Tesseract, but continues to search to see if they can find a body. So then we cut to Steve waking up and hearing a baseball game on the radio. Come to realize the baseball game that is being announced on the radio is a baseball game that Steve actually attended.
Where am I really?
I'm afraid I don't understand. The game. It's from May 1941. I know because I was there.
So without missing a beat, Steve busts through a wall and starts running out into Times Square. As he's out there, we start seeing different cars surrounding him, later to show Nick Fury, who introduces himself, obviously, and later lets him know that he's been asleep for almost 70 years, that they won the war, but of course, we all know a lot of other stuff happened till then.
Look, I'm sorry about that little show back there, but we thought it best to break it to you slowly.
Break what?
You've been asleep, Cap, for almost 70 years.
So then we see Steve looking around and realizing that
I had a date.
so the movie's over. So now we just skip through all the credits, start fast forwarding through all of it to later go to an end credit scene, which is a pretty popular thing that the MCU has made now, to show that Nick Fury comes to Cap to let him know that there's a mission that they need to go on, which is something I will be talking about later. The war efforts. Promote the war efforts. Promote the war efforts. Declares that he will Hydra will no longer focus on my face. Focus on my face. I am still recording that. While he's there, he finds out that Bucky was actually captured while trying to kidnap. Seeing clips of them at war, and they notice that Steve has a picture of Peggy on his phone. He doesn't have a phone. It's 1942.